Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the January non-controlled prescription drugs workgroup technical discussion. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and a recording of the meeting will be posted on the MHCC website. We have quite a few people already on the call, so I'm going to get started. We are not going to take a formal roll call. Instead, I ask if participants on the call can please update your name to include your organization. Similar to I have Anna Gribble MHCC, there's an option to update your name. And then also when you're speaking on the call, please let everyone know what organization you're representing. All right, so on the screen we have the agenda for today's meeting. And before I move forward, I'm going to ask David if he has any opening remarks to share with the group.
Sure, and just ever so quickly, good afternoon, everyone, and we certainly hope everyone enjoyed the holiday season. I just asked Anna, who schedules a meeting like this for a Friday, and she reminded me that it was probably me. So we appreciate you fitting us into your busy schedules this afternoon. The work that you all are doing is enormously important, and it will help lead to an RFP that Chris will develop to identify a vendor, a technology vendor that can help move forward the non-CDS reporting requirements in statute. So we'll jump right into the technical discussion today. We encourage everyone to weigh in as much as you frequently feel like doing, and we'll see how far we can make in terms of progress between now and 2:30. So with that, Anna, why don't you take it back?
Thank you, David. All right, so for those who weren't able to attend the last call, today's conversation is going to be a continuation for what we discussed on the December 12th meeting. We are going to be reviewing the potential variables for reporting of non-CDS data, and our goal is to complete this review by the end of January. So our goals for collecting data are to assist healthcare providers in the treatment and care coordination, to support public health efforts such as antibiotic stewardship, quality improvement efforts. And as we review these variables, it's important to keep in mind how the data could be used. It could be used to be matched to an additional data set. During our last conversation, we discussed matching, for instance, pharmacy and PI to the MPES data set. It could be used to be displayed in CRIS or in EHR to support clinical decision-making. And it also could be used for analysis for public health surveillance and evaluation purposes. This conversation is really meant to build upon previous conversations we've had, and thank you to those on the call who have already provided feedback on some of these variables. And it's meant to be a starting point for a discussion around the technical reporting considerations. So I'm going to share an Excel file in just one moment, and we'll walk through each variable on the Excel file, and they represent variables that are loosely based on the ASAP and NCPDP variables. And we'll walk through a set of questions for the work group. The first one being for our pharmacies on the group, what are the technical and policy considerations for reporting certain variables? For all of our providers on the group, what are the most, what fields would be provide the most utility in clinical decision-making? And then for everybody, what fields are essential for public health analysis or evaluation? All right, I'm going to pull up the Excel file now, and then we're going to start where we left off from the last meeting. And then, as I mentioned, each row is a potential variable. The ones that are shaded in gray represent fields that are similar in ASAP and NCPDP. They may be called something different, but these are fields I've been able to identify that are similar in both standards. And then I will do my best to document your feedback as we go through, but as a reminder, the meeting is being recorded. I'll go back and listen to the recording, fill in any gaps that I missed, and share it with the group. And then, so as a quick housekeeping note as we move forward, if you're not contributing to the conversation, please make sure you're on mute just so we can avoid any background noise. Now, before we get started with patient address, are there any questions from the work group about the next hour or so of the meeting? All right, well then let's get started. So we are in the patient section. This is continuation of an Excel file I shared with the work group after the last call. So our first question is for the pharmacist on the call. For our patient information for each non-CDS dispense, could a patient address be reported for each dispense?
And Anna, don't be bashful. This is a very voiceless group. All you have to do is invite someone specifically to speak, and I'm sure we'll get some answers that way as well.
Hi, Anna. Charlie from Albertsons. I don't believe address would be a problem.
Thank you, Charlie.
Hi, this is Janet from Rite Aid. I just want to throw something out there as far as address, and the question would be, what type of match would there be for the address? Because I know that I have seen errors where we have dispensed prescriptions in states where it's a homeless person and there's no address per se, so you put homeless or you put the zip code of the store. So I think part of that would also be based upon what type of match there is of the address to the zip code to what could be valid.
Thanks,
And
Janet.
this is Leanne with Scenario. There are additional issues about, are you using a USPS standard address to where can you do matching? What, like if you live on trail, is it TRL versus TRAIL? And are your analytics cleaning that? As well as creating a standard for homeless. I know with NCPDP, they've now changed it to like unhoused instead of homeless. So you would have to specify exactly what would be required for homeless patients and even perhaps facility-based patients.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I wonder, Dr. Borcher, if you could share with us how that's being handled in Nebraska.
Sure. At this point, we're accepting what the ASAP guides are, which are pretty non-specific. And I can tell you that there is ongoing work currently that hopefully will be done in the next month or so from ASAP for their new version, which is going to align or request, similar to what Leanne said with the USPS Publication 28 standard, aligning with the ONC's Project USA. That's going to be some upcoming work that the new ASAP standard will be released next year, or effective next year, I should say. Until then, that is a problem with patient matching in general, and we try to request the best information as possible. We do receive a lot of extraneous information in the address fields, and trying to adhere to standards would definitely be advantageous.
Thank you, Kevin. So a similar question for the group is address helpful to have for prescribing and dispensing decisions for patients?
Anna, could you repeat that question, please?
Yeah. So Dr. Nichols, is it helpful to have a patient address information when you're reviewing their prescription history?
Well, I think part of it is required by law, especially for controlled substances. For the non-controlled, I think that depends upon individual state law, but most certainly for a controlled substance prescription, yes.
This
Is
is
data eventually going to be used for helping physicians and practitioners make decisions on what to prescribe and what not to prescribe and all that? In that case, if the patient is not matched correctly, I guess address, date of birth is there, but if the address is not there, how would you identify the patient?
So why don't we ask Dr. Morheim, are you available to weigh in here?
Hi, thank you. Well, from a clinical point of view, I agree. What I understand is at least one entity, Eagle Force, already does all of this nationwide. That is, monitors and matches every prescription as it's filled in the United States in real time, 24/7, 365. So, but it does it for insurance and anti-kickback reasons. So it certainly is done and can be done. There may be other entities that do it as well. So from my point of view, as I've said before, this all should end up through the CRISP system. Presumably, it should be national, accurate, and timely. And hopefully there'll be a tab in the CRISP system that says medications, and wherever the patient was, you as a clinician or me as a clinician would be able to see that. But I would defer to other experts from Eagle Force or others in the IT world to say how exactly that's done. But it is being done and has been done for years, just for other purposes, with very accurate matching using AI technology, which I'm certainly not an expert in.
Very good, thank you.
I hope that helps, David.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Morheim. And this may be a good segue to ask Dr. McCree if she has any comment.
So I see that Stanley Campbell 3 is on the call, and he understands the technology. Maybe he could explain it.
Well, I'm in a vaccination clinic right now, stabbing people. So, but what Dr. Morheim said is true, because we actually do use the pharmacy, the standard NCPDB D.0 standard telecommunications transaction data. So everything that you see that the pharmacist needs is something that we already collect. Now, obviously, PHI, I guess, it's HIPAA compliant, and it's HIPAA and it's high tech, also high tech compliant. And so these data are already being collected and are part of our database for, as Dr. Morheim said, the anti-kickback statute. So our clients right now are pharmaceutical manufacturers, pharmacy benefits managers, and the actual pharmacies to prevent any kind of fraud. So again, as just to reiterate what Dr. Morheim said, this technology is already available and is already has a degree of accuracy that we don't see in other systems. Does that help at all?
And I also believe it goes right into the pharmacist's workflow, so they get an alert when there's a conflict. So they're not logging in and out of different websites or things to search. It just pops up automatically with all the work done behind the scenes. So it's very pharmacist friendly.
Okay, that's very helpful, and thank you. So if Stanley Campbell, did you have anything else that Dr. Morheim mentioned? You might have something to weigh in here on.
No, nothing from me.
Okay, very good. Thank you for the feedback, Anna.
Thank you all. Maya, are you able to remind us with the current PDP view, when a provider logs in to look at a patient's prescription history, the address that is displayed, is it matched from ASAP or is it coming directly from ASAP? I don't know if you know off the top of your head. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, I believe it's coming direct, matched to what? Sorry.
All right, so the information that's being reported using the ASAP standard, is that the address information used to match to CRISP Master Patient Index and the address they may have on file, or is what being displayed currently coming from ASAP?
Yeah, individuals can choose different patients based on their address. So they can say, you know, we may have a record of Anna Gribble at 123 Main Street and 245 Main Street, and CRISP has both of those. And so they can match that when someone queries and see both of that information.
So accurate address information sounds important to have for identifying a patient and matching them.
Yeah.
So may I just add one thing, David? One of the things that, you know, we feel Eagle Force is a discriminator is that these data are refreshed in kind of every 6 times a day, so that, you know, Anna Gribble at 123 Main Street and Anna Gribble at 456 Main Street could be the same person, or they could be 2 different people. But there's a multitude of contextual elements that contribute to tell you whether or not that person is which Anna it is, right? And the other thing is that, you know, in all of my electronic health record experience, right, if I start typing, like, let's say I found, you know, and this is was interesting, right? I typed in my last name to check my labs, which, you know, a lot of patients don't have that option, but, you know, as a provider, I started typing my last name in, and I found 2 other people with the same last name that are not related to me in the military, right? So what was stopping me from clicking on one of those people that was not my patient or not me, right? So we have to be careful about who has that. I think, you know, who has access, and you know, we're relying on you know, the fact that we don't have time to be nosy about other people that are not our patients, right? But there's nothing really stopping us from clicking on a patient that's not ours. And if you don't get a single response, right, a single individual, then you run the risk of inadvertently clicking on someone who's not your patient. So I just wanted to put that out there, that too is a discriminator for the Eagle Force technology.
One thing I'd add from CRISP also is that, and I'll let Craig fill in more, but we house a lot of clinical information as well. So we have a lot of different sources of data that are affecting our patient matching technology. And, you know, we want clinical users to see all of the appropriate data for their patients. But Craig, feel free to add anything I missed.
No, I was just going to emphasize, I mean, it's hard to answer the question in a vacuum unless we're thinking about how the full system, the user experience, data flow, how all the different things connect. But patient matching and then audit and protections on patient query is not something that's new to the industry, and certainly not the HIEs in Maryland.
Yeah, very good point. Thank you all for the comments.
Yeah, and before we move on from address, we talked a lot about what could be reported and then what is available in the clinical view. But is there also a public health utility in collecting patient address for public health analysis or evaluation or surveillance purposes?
Hey, Anna, this is Crystal Chisholm from Change Healthcare. Absolutely, there is value in collecting that from a patient health consideration. In terms of SDOH, we need to know the address or whether they're unhoused or whatever their housing situation is, so that we can make appropriate clinical decisions for them and appropriate public health decisions as the data is aggregated.
Yeah, I suspect thank you. I suspect we're going to hear that broadly, but I'd be curious, Dr. Rafi, I see you're on the call, if you had any perspective to add there as well. I think you're muted.
Yeah, go ahead and repeat the question, because I got a little call.
Oh, no worries, Anna.
Hi, Dr. Rafi. We're talking about patient address and the usefulness of collecting patient address for public health analysis and consideration purposes.
Well, would it benefit you to know like the zip codes or something? Is that why you'd want it?
I could definitely see how that could be used for like social determinants of health analysis or understanding urban versus rural differences in prescribing trends or dispensing trends.
Yeah, I would think that would be important.
This is Stephen Nichols from Mount Washington Pediatric Hospital. Just another thought about this in relationship to pediatric patients that may be moving back and forth between different parent homes or other addresses within their stay, and just how that's being reported and entered in the system, depending on who may be, taking them to get prescriptions or that kind of thing.
Well, that would be a problem if there's multiple addresses and it's not consistent.
Yeah, these are good points, and I think that Craig sort of laid the framework for how the MPI sort. So I don't know if he has anything more to add on that at this point. Craig, the sense is, perhaps you could weigh in. Is the sense that if there's multiple? I mean, how far back would an address? Let's say there's 10 addresses of one person. Would the provider be able to see all of those, or does the MPI use logic to try to whittle that list down a bit?
Yeah, so the MPI receives address and other demographic characteristics from all the different sources from any of the clinical or non-clinical feeds we have, and then essentially links them based on a probabilistic algorithm, and then presents the golden record address at the point of care. So typically there's an address for a person, and for most people that's that works, because most of us have a single address or have moved and have an updated address. Where we've created options, this was actually pioneered through the PDMP locally, is that if there's a near match, we give the option to view both people, because we want to give clinicians the capability to look more broadly than kind of the computer might dictate. And so there could be a situation where you have one or two or three options for people to look at, which again, we do many hundreds of thousands times a week, and it's for all the clinical data and PDMP data. And I would imagine this could be a very similar workflow.
Thank you, Craig. I appreciate that.
So I think we're good to move on to our next variable, which is phone number. So similar to address, are there any policy or technical considerations from the pharmacy side in recording patient phone number for each dispense?
Anna, from my perspective, what we typically see could be a potential hurdle with phone numbers is that there's a lot of folks that exist in our pharmacy database that would either have multiple phone numbers. So that's a potential, they're listing out, let's just say a landline, if people would have still a landline, and a mobile phone, and or multiple mobile phones. That is not uncommon. And we also see a lot of people that switch mobile phone numbers fairly regularly. I'm going to call them lightly a burner phone, right? So it's a purchase prepaid phone that exists for a very short period of time, and then that number goes away. So those are some of the things just to be aware of when you're talking about a phone number.
Thank you.
This is Alexis Wald with Kroger. I also wanted to point out it's the same kind of issue with addresses. You can have people that will not have a phone number, so there does need to be some kind of accommodation for the fact somebody may not have that contact information, possibly.
And then you need to take into account that you have multiple phone numbers.
Thank you both.
I also have patients who give other people's phone numbers as their phone number, like their mother or their next door neighbor.
And that's also a factor if you've got someone that is hearing impaired perhaps they're giving a phone number of a caregiver in order to get communication.
Well, let's not sacrifice the good for the perfect. There's always going to be outliers, but the vast bulk of people, these kinds of systems will work.
I was just gonna kind of echo that sentiment.
And lastly, you may have phone numbers across the same phone number across multiple people in a family unit. So as long as you don't run into the George Foreman scenario of phone numbers.
Thank you all. And similar to considerations for reporting, is having a patient's phone number helpful to have in a clinical view of looking at a patient's dispense history?
At one point, when phone numbers were dedicated to a particular region, you know, like you had a 214 area code and a whatever prefix, it meant something. But given the transient nature of phone numbers can be anywhere, and I've had the same cell phone number for 20 years. Doesn't matter where it doesn't give an indication of where you live or anything like that, particularly in the cell phone numbers, to where I think it's really more of a matter of a means to contact people. Don't know that there's any relative clinical decision making that can be made by that, unless you want to go to public health considerations, like, do they have a cell phone? But most people, cell phones are cheaper to have than landlines, you know, that type of thing. And unless you know what type of phone number it is, I don't even know that it's real relevant other than contact.
I mean, it's a really helpful patient matching mechanism. I mean, I agree with you. It's not that useful in it alone necessarily. I mean, maybe for certain interventions or care management, but if we have a first name, last name, no middle initial, address with no house number, and the phone number matches, the phone number makes a really big difference.
Thank you, Greg. Okay, I'm going to move us on from phone number unless there are other comments about collecting patient phone number or use for it. It sounds like address is more helpful for some of these public health analysis purposes, and it may be a field that, you know, isn't consistent from patient to patient, but if available, could be helpful for patient matching. All right, let's move on to date of birth for the patient. For our pharmacists and pharmacies on the group, is this something that could be reported for each non-CDS dispense?
This is Bill Evans from Express Scripts. I could see an owner feeling a little bit on the odd side, having to provide their date of birth when they're picking up their puppy's heart guard.
But then again, this goes back to, I think, something Kevin had said on the last call, that I don't think that you want your HIE cluttered, perhaps, with pet prescriptions. Now, controlled substances are probably more of an issue, only because of the abuse of controlled substances. But also, a lot of those are dispensed by veterinarians, and they have no real ability that would be to translate, you know, the other prescriptions or would want to. A lot of them are pet meds anyway.
Yeah, I think I recall, well, perhaps Dr. Borcher, you could speak to that. Isn't there a species code that it can be filtered out based on that? So if it's a species code that's, an animal, then it feels like then reporting things like birth date becomes irrelevant. Is that correct?
Yes, that's what we actually do in Nebraska with our HIE. When we get the feed in from our PDMP, species code is one of the criteria. If it's 1, which equals human, we accept it. If it's 2, we don't process it in the HIE.
Yeah, so I think then the point would happen here is there would be some logic or algorithm built in that if it's turned out that we're not collecting information, because this is really to help public health and or the care delivery of the treating provider, we probably would end up, as Dr. Borcher noted, much the same. We would look to filter out data that has a species code of O2.
As far as humans go, wouldn't that be the primary identifier other than the name? So that they can be matched to the other data in the databases?
So are you referring to the birth date specifically, you mean?
Yeah, like date of birth should be collected and should be transmitted for all non-CDS. Otherwise, how would we match the patient just by name? Because if you're not collecting address, then the date of birth should be at least the second identifier. Because names can be spelled wrong. We have a big ethnic population which uses 2 middle names, and I don't even know, like when we look up Medicaid, their names are different than how we would enter. So without a date of birth, it's very hard to match, I would assume. Like from 2 different pharmacies, if we don't send the date of birth, the same patient might go to pharmacy A and pharmacy B, the data may not match. So it won't show up under the same patient.
Yeah, good point.
Also, people might have the same name, and the only way of identifying one person from the other would be the date of birth.
Thank you. I could see the field being particularly important to collect.
Yeah, I agree.
Also for patient matching, it sounds like I'm going to assume that there's definite use for date of birth for public health considerations. Do others have specific ideas on the use of date of birth for public health analysis?
One thing for date of birth that can be important is for certain grants, the Bureau of Justice Assistance, BJA, requests that for their controlled substances, you provide information on adults and the pediatric population. I believe it's 19 and younger. I'm not sure if other grant requirements also do that, but it can help to identify maybe trends for analytics.
Thank you, John.
It also can help for patient matching as well.
And it's generally not a problem for pharmacies to report it because they do their dead level best to have it in there just to be able to do effective drug utilization review.
So is there ever an incident that you've run into with filling a script where a patient would just simply not provide that information to you? Or, I mean, as a matter of process, have you encountered that? And if so, then you just move on, I take it, or is there some other,
If it's insurance-based, then generally you have it. The more common practice is people not giving you an accurate one.
Okay.
Like, oh, I'm not going to tell them I'm 62 years old or I'm 53 years old. I'm going to tell them I'm 43. And unless you have an insurance company on the other side, or if you're taking an ID to verify it, what do? You can't challenge the patient. So
Yeah, in our system, everyone has to show an ID.
You know, the more common occurrence.
So, Dr. Raffi, you're saying that.
So in our system, everyone has to show an ID of some kind.
Makes sense.
An ID that would have a date of birth listed.
I'm sorry, an ID, passport, driver's license, resident card with a date of birth on it.
But I think we can move on from date of birth and hearing. It's a particularly important field for many aspects and most likely available from a few different sources. Moving on to patient gender. From the pharmacy side, is this something that could be reported for each non-CDS dispense? Are there considerations for patient gender?
Most systems will not allow you to proceed without a gender in there. Some drugs are contraindicated are not given for women, some are not given for men. So I would say it's important to have gender in there.
Thank you.
This is Janet from Rite Aid again. I think this field or discussion on this field is expanding in the industry right now as far as some additional terminology that are used as far as just simply male and female. And I think that, you know, others are looking at the expansion of the field as far as non-binary or other terms that are out there. So I'm not sure exactly what options would be given. And I know I've been on calls for a few other associations, and there's been discussion about that. But I think this is just a field right now that is under some discussion.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing that, because I was going to ask that question. As some states have moved to allow for self-designation,
Right.
how is that being handled in the pharmacy capturing of this information? Sounds like it's a TBD.
Yeah, and many people are, and there's a trend towards having two separate, essentially a sex defined or assigned at birth or a legal sex versus a gender identity.
Yeah, in our system, there is a gender, sex at birth and gender separation. And then there is pronouns that the field has been added. So you can have all three of them.
And I think that's what makes it confusing, because not all systems talk in that same language right now as far as what their options are or what they're allowed to choose from. So I think that this whole topic right now is just really, really up for discussion.
I should be more familiar with ASAP or NCPDP specs, but can we just assume that we'll mirror whatever the national standards organizations have already done? Like, I'm not sure that we can figure out a better answer to gender than kind of these other bodies who are deliberately working on these kinds of questions are already doing.
So, Craig, that's a good point, and I would just assert for the group is I'm not sure that we can arrive at a conclusion today, but I think depending upon the value of it, I mean, it could vary. I mean, we heard from a couple of clinicians saying that there's drug contradictions indications when used for different genders. You know, there's a public health utility that wouldn't be so concerned about whether or not, you know, it was gender at birth, although there could be some value in that as opposed to a gender that was later self-designated. So I think this is an area where more to come, but the reporting of it today can only be limited to the standards that exist in ASAP or NCPDP.
And gender aspects are both of them are fields that are listed in both ASAP and NCPDP. And I tried to indicate when that occurs, when the field is gray. They may be called gender or it may be called sex. Kevin, you may have to remind me, I think ASAP has changed how that's designated over the past few years, and there may be conversations on that expanding.
Yeah, in the next version, to be effective next year, the decision on last month's meeting was to keep the name gender, keep male, female, add a new code of non-binary, and change the unknown to unknown/undisclosed. That is not the current standard. That has not been formally approved yet, but that's the direction ASAP is taking.
And I don't think we know about what NCPDP is doing unless Dr. McCree or Stanley, you have any thought on that? Okay, Carol, I don't know if
I'm not Dr. McCready or Stanley, but what NCPDP is doing is actually changing, just so that the group knows. What's currently there is potentially going to differ from the new standards that are in process of being named. There is a telecom version F7 that will actually change the way it is defined within the standard. If that one gets named, which is still up in the air as to whether that's going to be named in the next HIPAA guidance, but that is changing. So the standards have actually named some differences, but whether they're officially being required yet is another story. So that's why it's a little fluid too.
Okay.
Leanne, pipe in.
Yeah, there are a number of changes going on, and depending on which standard you're talking about in NCPDP, this is basically the medication list standard, I believe, that you're discussing, that I believe has all that in it already. But yeah, it's changing, and code sets that they use for it, even like for preferred pronouns and things, I think it's like LOINC codes. So they're also kind of basing it on additional standards for things like that.
Great, thanks for sharing.
Thank you all. We've talked some already about species code and the importance of collecting it to be able to separate out human dispenses versus pet dispenses. It's an important QI process. Is there anything else to add about species to contribute to this conversation?
And in our system, there is no easy way to do the pet like designation. So this would have to be and Pioneer RX is one of the biggest ones for independent pharmacies. So I'm not sure, this might be something that has to go back to all these software vendors. They have to make changes.
Yeah, you know, and that's an interesting point. I think Sarah Robertson, are you able to weigh in? Because how is the PDNP approaching this today?
We haven't provided any guidance other than, officially. in fact, we're in the process right now where our regulations are being reviewed, and they were just posted today. And we want to have species code as a required field, so that we can make that designation. But we have not given pharmacies guidance. What I've told them informally is that there are national standards that were developed by the Technical Assistance Center for PDMP to enter the owner or handler's first name, last name, date of birth, make sure you enter species code. So, and again, we work with controlled substances. So those prescriptions could potentially come up when you look for a patient to help get a sense of care coordination and what that patient might need. So again, we haven't given guidance. We're about to give guidance once our regulations are promulgated to to align with the national standards for pet dispenses.
And Dr. Borcher, have you run into this in Nebraska?
Around specifically on challenges with pet dispenses.
Well, I think we've heard that there's some, for independent pharmacies, the technology may not be, for lack of better words, keeping pace with the reporting requirements. And so, what happens if there's a requirement for reporting things like a species code, and they're not able to do that?
We've had pretty good luck at that. We do receive the species code in, I can't recall exactly, I believe it's about 99% plus of all dispenses, controlled and non-controlled. Now that species code we do find is not always accurate, where we've done some rudimentary analytics and found both that some animals are listed under human species code and vice versa. We see some humans occasionally listed under an animal species code. So I think it is a challenge with some, and we've been working with a lot of those vendors directly to be able to accurately report. So we're making progress, but I would say it's not 100% accurate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other additions on species codes from the group? All right, I'm going to move on to the next variable, which is patient location code, place of service. And I believe we heard a consideration for patient address before, about consideration for facility-based patients. This field in particular is the potential location of the patient when receiving pharmacy services. So if it is home, then O1 is an option, but then there are all these other additional options. And we'd love to hear from pharmacists on the ability to report this field for each non-CDS dispense.
In our pharmacy, it's only important for insurance. Or if the insurance asks for it, that's the only time we collect it. The default is usually home. Unless you're billing an institutional patient, that code is not required and it's never collected.
And kind of building on that, is the pharmacist or the pharmacy or the technician entering the patient may not know, is it intermediate, what classification of facility it is. Again, depending on whether the insurance company or the insurance provider requires that information. So I don't know if it's a subacute care facility or a skilled care facility, and just putting them in. I know they're at a quote nursing home.
And hi, this is Matt with Harris Teeter, kind of building on that as well. You know, a lot of the prescriptions, I would say even maybe the majority of prescriptions that our pharmacists are getting, they don't know any of this information, maybe until the patient or the patient's caregiver is coming to pick up the prescription. So by the time the data entry and the processing and everything is done, they wouldn't have the ability to get this information until someone's coming to pick up the prescription. And then the process of going back to enter this information after the fact comes with varying levels of difficulty depending on the system they're working on.
Matt, would there be a likelihood in that situations that even if it were known after the fact, there wouldn't be any, as you noted, going back and adjusting the record?
I think if we're speaking in terms of the reality of the situation, that would be a very low priority.
Right.
Updating the information on the patient for the next fill is one thing. Going back and re-adjudicating it, unless it would cause a difference in adjudication, would likely never happen.
Makes sense.
Do we have any pharmacists on the work group today who are representing specialty pharmacies who could speak maybe to this field? I know we have a few on the group, but I don't know if any of them are on the call today. I will follow up with some of them too, and I believe we've heard input from some part. Leanne, did you want to have anything else to add to that?
No.
And Bill from Express Scripts, is this information that y'all would have available, or would this be difficult to know?
Our specialty pharmacies sometimes identify something other than home, but our commercial home delivery pharmacy does not have that, does not have the ability to identify. Yeah, we do in our PDMP reports from Accredo Specialty sometimes see nursing home or long-term extended care kind of things, but that is pretty rare. And where they get that information, honestly, I don't know.
That's fine, thank you. So it sounds like it's a field that may most likely to be entered by specialty pharmacies, something other than home, but the default, it sounds from many pharmacies, it is home. And on the clinical decision-making side, is this information helpful to know? I'm sure for prescribers, you would be aware if you're making a current prescription decision for a patient, the location of the patient, or dispensers, it sounds like may not be readily available to support clinical decision-making. I'm just interested to know, would this be helpful to view in the either CRISP or an EHR when making dispensing or prescribing decisions?
And Dr. Rafi, do you want to offer an idea here?
Not sure how, I'm not sure how to answer this.
That's okay, thanks, Dr. Rafi. It's one of those questions where in the timeline, you would end up knowing where a patient was when you're interfacing with them. So you would know if they were in a facility potentially.
Well, I mean, so you're asking would the, like this categories, for me, it would be outpatient, right? So for me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think that gets to us to the answer we were looking for. Thank you.
This is Karen Guinan from Wegmans. The only time I think it really is from a clinical standpoint might matter when it's hospice and we have a Schedule 2 and we have to partial the Schedule 2, that's allowed in a hospice situation. I don't know if that matters at all.
No, that's important. Thanks for sharing.
So you get a prescription and you like only dispense half? Is that what you mean by
They
partial?
allow us to dispense a certain amount, knowing that the patient is at end of life, and especially if it's an expensive. Mike
this is a good
Scazzaro, I
guy.
don't know if you're on the call, because if they only need like a week at a time or a couple of days at a time, because there's no sense in charging the patient's family for a whole lot if they're only going to need a certain amount at a time, especially when they're at end of life. So we're allowed to do partial, but we have to specify it's hospice.
Would agree, Karen.
Okay.
This is Mike from Wegmans.
Thanks. I was looking for some Mike.
I got you.
Need your help there. Thanks.
Mike.
Mike.
Thank you.
Another thing to add, used to work in a pharmacy that serviced nursing homes. As far as the prescription writing process, nursing homes sometimes require the diagnosis to be written on the prescription. When the prescription comes to the pharmacy, the label has to show the diagnosis. There is only fixed amount of drug units that they have to be given, or the doctor has to specify what time to give it. There's all these questions when you come to nursing homes. So that's why most commercial pharmacies will not select this field. One more thing, the contracts for nursing home pharmacies, or those pharmacies that serve nursing homes or long-term care, are different than those for commercial. So the payment model is different. So unless you are a pharmacy that deals with it, you're not even allowed to use those codes. So we will never collect it. And even if a patient comes from a nursing home, we still have to bill it as a person staying at home, not a nursing home, because we don't have the contract for it.
That's a very
Interesting. So it sounds like, go ahead, David, sorry.
No, go ahead. I think that's a very interesting comment. It's certainly notable.
But it sounds like that could be a potential limitation in looking at some of this information for public health considerations. Thank you for sharing that. All right, in the interest of time, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on name of animal. We talked about pet dispenses quite a bit, and considering the intent of collecting this information, I'm not seeing us spending much time on discussing name of animal, but it is one of the fields in, I believe, ASAP that could be reported. One field that I had noted in the NCPDP standard that is specific to the patient is a pregnancy indicator. And this sometimes required for potentially federal programs when submitting this information. Is this information available only in narrow situations? If anyone who's familiar with it, that would be helpful to share.
This is Bill Evans. That is not information that we would generally have at Express Scripts.
And the other problematic thing about the pregnancy indicator is, yes, you may know when a person becomes pregnant, but not necessarily when that pregnancy is over, is that flag removed.
What information would it be? Pregnant or not, or postpartum?
The NCPDP flag, I believe, is just pregnant, yes or no. So if they came in to get their prenatal vitamins and never came back for a while, who knows if that flag would be updated.
This is Mike from Wegmans. I would vote we do not start looking at taking this from patients. It's pretty sensitive and we don't ask it today.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's something we ought to make a note of, because I'm not hearing any of the physicians or dispensers say, oh, this is really required, we have to have it. So I think they're probably.
Are you, wait, I was trying to unmute myself. So for pregnancy versus pregnancy, yes or no, is that what you're asking? Because there are some drugs that are clear teratogens, right? So you, somebody has to know that, and the whatever software that we are proposing for non-CDS has to take into account, or has to be able to alert that that this is a, you know, first of all, a REMS drug, right? If you want to get you know, compound the issue, right? And then, but for example, one of the common drugs that we use is Accutane, but another one is tetracycline, right? Any viromycin, tetracycline derivatives is going to cause is going to cause a birth, you know, a congenital issue, particularly with teeth. But Accutane is really dangerous. You know, people who may take methotrexate for rheumatoid arthritis, for example, probably shouldn't be taking it if they're pregnant. So there are a lot of restrictions and on what drugs you can or cannot take for the safety of the developing fetus.
So, Dr. Macri, I think I think you're bringing up some very good points, but I'm also hearing the dispenser saying this isn't a field that's widely used, unless I'm mistaken. So, could some of the dispensers weigh in on how this is handled today?
Can I just say that hopefully the purpose of this system is not so a provider can write prescriptions without interacting with the patient.
Carl, I cannot agree with you more on that statement.
We're talking about things where that really, you know, you have the patient in front of you in most instances. And certainly one of the questions that you're going to ask is, are you pregnant? And you know, if you're writing for a prescription like Accutane, I think that's information that you have to document.
I think that there's another issue, right? And I completely agree with you on the prescriber side, but what if you have a prescription, right? Or even a refill, and that is kind of a remote from, like, you know, a 3-month refill, right? That is remote from that. So somebody at the dispenser is going to then have the responsibility, because, you know, with refills, we don't necessarily see the patient for, you know, every refill. We can, as a patient, I can just go into my blue button and renew my meds, right? So I think that there could be an issue. And I'm on the NCPDP REMS to workflow task group, or whatever it's called. And we discussed this at kind of at great length, you know, because the pregnancy issue may not affect that many people, but the outcome, it could be devastating if we don't ask the question.
So this is Mike from Wegmans, and I'm not going to stay on this point too long. So I would add that for refills, you know, I don't know how this would trigger, right? Because we're refilling the prescription. We're not going to look at this for refills, I'm assuming, right? Because patients picking it up at the pharmacy, it's not going to trigger me, you know, that she's pregnant now. And they come in and we're not required to counsel on refills. You know, we are required to counsel on a new prescription. At that point, we are relaying the information, as the prescriber did, that, hey, this could cause these issues. And if by chance you are or become pregnant, then this is what we need you to do. In terms of REMS, there is no refills on REMS products, so that's really not an issue in my opinion. But I just don't want, I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but I do understand the importance. But at the same time, you know, this is not something that's happening today at all.
So, Anna, why don't I propose that we make a note, highlight this field, and we don't look for a resolution today, because it's interesting. We're hearing there's a clinical utility, but we're also hearing some of the challenges related to the dispensing aspect of it. And I think we should take this offline and work more with you all as we move forward.
Sounds good. Thank you. That was our last field for patient. Before I move on from patient, is there any other comments about the patient-specific variables?
Yeah, just a general comment that virtually every one of those fields has considerations for public health. I mean, just for the analytics after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
This is Sarah from the PDMP. I was digging in data after being prompted by Anna, thankfully. Species code is filled out or is missing just 2.5% of the time in the PDMP data. And that was from 2020. From 2018, it was missing 27.5. So that has changed in at least 2 years ago. So just so you guys know for your planning that at least for the PDMP, species code is filled out, whether it's filled out correctly, like Kevin was saying, is another thing. And that it is a way that we can check compliance, because we can see if it's a species code and then match it up to the prescriber to see if it was a vet. So it is a point of it does provide information to be able to QA the data.
And Sarah, what kind of guidance would you provide to a dispenser whose technology wasn't capable of making that distinction? What guidance would you provide?
I think a lot of other systems do collect it. So I would say see if they can coordinate and see how other systems or other pharmacies do it, because it's been an ASAP standard for as long as I know. So I don't know, Kevin might be able to shed some light on that for Nebraska, but you know, they would need to just add a code, add species.
Okay, Dr. Porcher, would you concur?
Yeah, I don't think some vendors may struggle with that, but we're working with them, and most are at least seem to be compliant and able to do it. It's coding that if it's a required field, they would need to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, and in some cases it could just be set up because of the various ways states require that to be submitted on PDMP. There's variations in that can cause some difficulties.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Right, and if it's been reported on over 97% of our dispenses, then I would assume the majority of the systems have capacity to do that.
Yeah, I would concur.
I have a basic question. How is this information going to be obtained? Is the patient filling out like a Freesia type thing on a handheld iPad, or is the pharmacy tech asking the patient these questions and entering it in?
So Dr. Rafi, do you mean specifically on the species component, or do you mean just?
Well, yeah, like all this stuff, like species is what was triggering. I mean, they're not going to know. I mean, species actually name, they'll know, and the type of animal they may not know. Like I filled out a prescription for my cat, but they don't know Leo is a cat, right? So how do they get that information? Is it being entered by me, the patient who's picking up the prescription, or the pharmacist?
Well, the species is just human or non-human. So they're not literally saying it's a cat, dog, cow, horse, whatever. So it's just basically binary.
And that's easily determined by the veterinarian. The veterinarian doesn't have an NPI, but does have a DEA.
Yeah, I was actually still stuck on the. Yeah, I was still actually stuck on the whole pregnancy question. So and I sent Anna, I sent you an email. Because if this is being obtained by the patient filling out the information, I think asking them, hey, are you pregnant or not, would be another question that you'd ask, right? Because I know somebody said it might be a sensitive question, but it is a real issue. There's a lot of drugs out there that are problematic and you need to know. And what they do is they put a sticker on the bottle that says, do not take if you're pregnant. But I don't know how many patients read the bottles because there's like a bazillion of stickers and they're sideways. So I wasn't sure, how are you getting this information? How are you getting all their addresses and all their phone numbers and, you know, where they're located? How are you getting it?
So, so there's a lot of questions to unpack there, and I think there's more questions that your question prompts. For example, if the patient designates and a prescription's been written, and they may not know that they're pregnant, they could be taking it with unbeknownst to them and with the impact.
Right.
So,
But do you ask them though? I mean, you ask them though.
and yes, and assuming they know, then we get a response. But so I think there are lots of challenges with the pregnancy item, and you bring to light good additional questions and points. So I think we hear a volunteer to help us work through this in a smaller group as we get further downstream, and we appreciate it. There's information that's shared both from technology solution to technology solution. So any of the dispensers want to weigh in on just generally speaking, how much manual input that it's required on their part to enter in patient information when a prescription is sent to them electronically?
David, this is Matt with Harris Teeter. I mean, I can only speak for, you know, our organization, but I think, you know, there's probably going to be as many different answers for that as there are different systems out there. So, you know, when we receive an electronic prescription, if it's a patient who has never been in one of our facilities before, I mean, it's 100% manual entry of data that's given to us by the provider. If it's a patient who walks up with a prescription in their hand, then that's a position where, again, it's 100% manual data entry of that information, but we have the patient there to actually ask these questions about. But when we look at, you know, the increase in the amount of overall electronic prescribing these days, it is, I think, much more likely than not that we are never going to see this patient until they come to pick up that prescription. So all of this is happening in the background before we have our initial contact with the patient. I would say 8 times out of 10 at this point.
Okay. Okay. Anyone have anything different to add to that?
And the other thing you have to consider is the person picking up that prescription may not be the person for whom that prescription was written.
That's right.
A couple points. One on the pregnancy, just to reassure the doctor that most pharmacists are flagged in the system, meaning if a drug comes up that's should not be given to a pregnant woman, the system flags it, and you really have to put in a password to get by that. A pharmacist has to put that. So at that point, hopefully the pharmacist is making a note on the prescription bag or something to counsel the patient. Are you pregnant? Going to be becoming pregnant or whatever, to avoid a potentially bad situation. So that safety net is built in, but none of the systems that I know of, I worked in 3 or 4 of them, ask that question, are you pregnant or not, while entering the patient. Right. And as far as the second question goes, is electronic prescription, like Matt said, most of the information when a patient walks up is entered manually, but at least in our system software, you can, if it's a new patient and the doctor has information in their system, when they send the electronic prescription, all that is transferred to us. And when you hit add the patient, it adds all that information into our system. Demographic, not anything else, just the demographic information. And nowadays, it is also transmitting prescription plan information through this system. So eScripts is, at least we use eScripts, and it's doing that. You can simply hit one button and all of the information is added in.
Okay, thank you very much. Anna, please continue.
Thank you. So I think we have time maybe to start the prescription information but not go through many variables. And we can pick up where we leave off on our next call. So why don't we start with prescription number? So from our pharmacies on the call, is this something that can be reported for every non-CDS dispense or most of them?
Yes.
Yeah, it's required by law. It has to be on the bottle. It's reportable.
Okay.
It may not be available for matching unless you pair it with the pharmacy, though, as duplicate numbers might exist.
Brilliant. So I understand duplicate numbers on a like multiple dispenses may have the same prescription numbers.
No, what I'm saying is I may have a prescription number 12345 that I got from pharmacy A, and another one 1234. Somebody else got a 12345 with my same name from pharmacy B. You can't do any matching on it just based on prescription number alone.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you for clarifying this.
Emily,
I'm gonna,
a similar point for refills, which Anna, I believe you were kind of asking about. A refill will have the same prescription number, but a different, I believe there's a different field for fill number.
So, okay, so a refill will have the same prescription number, but then potentially there's another field like refills authorized or refill number that will be indicated.
Fill numbers line 79. Sorry, didn't want to stomp on you. Line 79 on your spreadsheet.
Thank you. And then is the prescription number something that would be useful to see in a clinical display? Is it useful information for prescribing or dispensing decisions?
This is Kevin. I think that it is very important, somewhat for clinical decisions, in that more of a technical piece. If you get duplicate files or duplicate records submitted, it may look like that prescription was filled multiple times and could impact a decision. So the prescription number, along with other fields such as date written, quantity, can all aid in the deduplication, so you have accurate and more complete information.
And that
Leanne, did you want to add to that?
And that's where I was just kind of getting with, you can't rely on strictly prescription number to do matching or deduplication. You've got to use pharmacies, date writtens, fill numbers, or I mean date fill, probably date written. There's a number of fields that are all critical in making sure you don't duplicate or inadvertently match based off that.
So,
and in addition, if the prescription's transferred from one pharmacy to another pharmacy, it will have a new prescription number.
So Leanne, is this prescription number, the value of it is just limited to the dispensing pharmacist?
Yes.
Okay.
Dispensing pharmacy.
Yeah, I got it. It's like a control number to track an issue.
Right, but if that prescription number, even if it's transferred to, for example, a CVS pharmacy number 13 to a CVS pharmacy number 15, it will get a new prescription. Yeah.
Over again. Okay. So the utility of this number doesn't seem to be very high, except within that the brick and mortar building where it's issued or filled.
Correct.
Okay.
It's useful,
just a
but
unique.
yeah.
excuse me, I'm sorry. It's just a unique identifier that separates that prescription from every other prescription in your pharmacy.
Yeah, I understand. But it would have no utility to a physician, like Dr. Nichols wouldn't be looking for it when he's just prescribing or looking at medication histories. Is that correct, Dr. Nichols?
That's try. Can't remember looking at a prescription number with any of my patients.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thankfully gone are the days when we would get a handwritten prescription and all it would say is renew prescription number XXX, and the prescriber signs it and the patient hands it to you. You have no idea if you're dispensing the correct medication or not.
Carl, you're dating yourself.
That's the truth.
Yeah, no worries. Understood.
And thank you, Dr. Raffi, for your chat. It sounds like it's not a number you would use either. Well, I've definitely learned a lot just in the past few minutes just about prescription number. So thank you. I'm going to stop the conversation about the variable right now. And considering we have quite a few variables in prescription history to go through, or prescription information, then prescriber, and then several segments that are NCPDP specific to insurance and claims and pricing, I'm going to recommend that we have an additional meeting before our January 30th meeting. Our goal is to get through this list by the end of January. And I think in order to do that, we're going to need to schedule an additional call. So I'm going to propose that we meet again on January 23rd, and that is a week from this coming Monday. We have a poll ready for the group. It should have popped up on your screen. Can you please indicate if there's a time on the 23rd or if that date could work for you?
And Anna, is this going to be assessed in real time while we're watching? Or is this something you'll take offline and come back to us?
And are these times all these times are Eastern, correct?
Correct. Yes. Thanks. These are all Eastern times. We can continue with wrapping up while people are entering in the times, and then we can. Why don't we decide offline after we may hear from others as well?
Okay.
All right. So with that, is there anything else the group would like to share regarding our conversations today? It sounds like we're going to have a subgroup meet after we review these continued variables to discuss pregnancy status and issues around pregnancy. I think there's several topics that we discussed that could be beneficial to have in a subgroup. Are there other things that anyone from the work group would like to contribute at this point? All right. David, do you have any closing remarks you'd like to add?
Sure, and just real quick, I would a huge round of applause for everyone for your time and interest and your willingness to contribute some intellectual input to the work that we're doing. It's a journey we're on. We're excited about it. We can't say enough how grateful we are for your willingness to help out. It's important work that you're doing here, so we hope we can encourage you to just hang in there with us a couple more meetings where they require this level of intensity, or as some might note, very dry conversation. We can get into more exciting elements to talk about, which we have once we get through the technical specification aspects of it. But we're, again, greatly appreciative for everyone's time, and we wish you a wonderful and joyous weekend, and we look forward to talking to you again soon. Anna, you want to call us to a closure?
Well, yes, thank you everyone. And as a reminder, the recording and the summary will be available, and I will also share this Excel file if you have any additional information to contribute on the variables we discussed today. So thank you all and have a good weekend.